Welcome to Larking Gowen Insights, accountancy and business advice for all, a series that gives you bite-sized tips and guidance on tax, funding, legislation, reforms and much more. With case studies, business advisory and sector specials and even interviews, our team of experts are committed to helping you navigate the world of accounting and finance with a variety of presenters from across our specialisms. So, let's get on with today's show.
Hi, I'm Jamie Butcher and I'm joined by Louise Dean, a partner in our medical team. We're here to talk about the pros, cons and financial implications of becoming a partner in a GP partnership. So Louise, what are the changes that can be expected when you become a partner?
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Jamie. It's a big thing to think about when considering joining a partnership is that we're not just talking about a title change here. We're looking at kind of a fundamental change to your role, moving away potentially from salaried, from registrar, from locum, to being a co-owner of the business and that business that holds an NHS contract. So if we try and break that down a little bit more, so your day-to-day role as a salaried GP, let's use that as an example, you will be focusing on the clinical delivery, and that will be in line with the employment contract that you have and what's set out by the partners, your bosses, on how that care to the patients will be delivered and what your various roles and responsibilities are within the practice. If we look at that from a GP partner side of things, you will have the day-to-day clinical delivery to the patient, so that's not going to change. It may be slightly lessened because what you will then have on top of that is the overall leadership of the business alongside your fellow partners. You may take a leading role in potentially HR, in maybe AI, digital use, finances, clinical governance. So you could have your day-to-day clinical work, but then you have this overall responsibility of the running of the surgery to ensure that the care given to the patients is acceptable standard and that the practice is financially viable. So alongside your day-to-day role, let's think about the income side of things. So as a salaried GP, you will be paid a salary as set out in your employment contract. You may have some benefits on top, and that will tend to be fixed. You may get annual pay rises each year, and that will be paid to you through the payroll. So you'll have tax, national insurance deducted from that. As a partner, this is where one of the big changes it comes from, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but you have a share of profits, and those profits will fluctuate year on year. I'm sure you will hear about the GP contracts and how that changes, financial pressures. So you never really know what your profits are going to look like until the end of the year. There are things you can do to preempt and have an idea, but ultimately you don't know what your actual income is going to be until the year has ended. On account, you will be paid a drawing from the surgery that could fluctuate over time, and there is a risk that your income could go up. Well, that's not really a risk, is it? That's a positive, but there's a risk your income could go down, but you have the control to potentially earn more money by offering more services. So income is a big shift away from salaried because also you're not taxed at source, and we'll cover that later. Let's look at the control you may have within the surgery. So as a salaried GP, you may be able to have some influence through ideas, through, you may be involved in meetings. That will very much depend on the practice that you are in. You may have no control at all. As a GP partner, essentially you and your fellow partners are the only ones that have control. So there will be a voting. Potentially we need to vote on the strategy, on taking on new staff, how you invest your money, what services you undertake. So there is a huge level of control that you have as a partner. And finally, the last element is around accountability. So as a salaried GP, you have to make sure you are performing in line with your oath as a GP and acting kind of ethically with how you are behaving. It's your own personal professional duty. As a partner, not only is it your own responsibility and how you are acting, it's that of your staff, of your premises, of the contract holder, you are accountable for everything that goes on within that surgery alongside your fellow partners. So the big element to think about initially is, the potential rewards of earning more, because GP partners do tend to earn more, the autonomy, the long-term value that you can gain from being a partner, all of these pros, do they outweigh the potential risks, the time involved, and the extra responsibility that you're taking on? I think that's one of the very first questions you need to ask yourself, because if the answer is no, then you potentially wouldn't really go any further forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Louise. So what would you say are the key aspects that someone considering a GP partnership would need to understand about the business that they may become a partner in?
So I think there's kind of 5 questions that I would say you need to speak to the partnership about and that you need to consider. I think questions to kind of ask yourself: do you want to have influence over how the business is run, the services you offer, the people you employ, how you engage with your PCN, with upcoming neighbourhoods? How much influence do you want to have over that? How much do you want to be involved in the decision making? I think look at the risk element. Are you comfortable with those drawings? Are you comfortable with the exposure? Now, a big thing with GP surgeries is they tend to follow a partnership model. So there is unlimited liability within this partnership model. So if there was a claim brought to the practice from an employee, from a patient, and the claim was too large for the practice to be able to fund, then your personal assets can be at risk. So that is a really big thing to think about. It doesn't happen very often, but it's definitely something you should be aware of. So are you comfortable with that? Can you absorb the extra time needed for management, suddenly getting called in for urgent operational issues, the meetings that you will need to have as a partnership? Now, hopefully those meetings will be well organised, well run, quite streamlined. You can make decisions relatively quickly. So hopefully the time isn't too onerous, but it is going to be something over and above. I think a really key one is the relationships with your who would be your fellow partners. Do you trust them? Do you enjoy how the decisions are made? Do the values, potentially work-life balance, does that sit well with your own personal beliefs and your own personal values? I say this all the time: if you've got some partners who value making money versus some who value time off, you're coming at your decision making from very different angles, and that's going to be really hard to, I think, harmoniously potentially come to a decision. Someone is going to have to make a decision that doesn't sit well with their own beliefs, and I think that's where animosity can come through. That, who you are working with, I think is one of the most important points, because we all spend a lot of time at work. We want to, it needs to be a nice place to work. And if you've got partnerships who are in dispute, who are unstable, they don't tend to perform as well. And how does it fit with life, outside of work, family, health issues? Do you have quite a portfolio career? So have you got some salaried, some locum work, some ICB work, some teaching or training? How would this fit into the mix? And would you have to give up something to make room for it, and future plans and what you want to do? So I think these are kind of the 5 questions you kind of need to ask yourself, but you also need to be able to understand how the practice operates in those ways. What is the drawings policy? How do they work with meetings? So I think they're questions to ask yourself, but also of your fellow partners as well.
And what about a set of accounts for a GP practice? What can I get from those?
This is really, really key aspect, and understanding the financials and what it means for you as an individual. Because as I said, you haven't got that security of a salary. You don't have the security of employment rights, essentially. So really understanding the financials is really key here. So first off, I think you need to make sure you get at least 3 years accounts from the practice. And first red flag, if they're not willing to give them to you, what does that say about them as a practice? they should really be as transparent as they can be if they are, keen on you to join the partnership. So getting, as I said, at least 3 years of accounts, so you've got more of a trend, because within GP finance, things fluctuate up and down as contract changes. Within COVID year, profits were quite large, lots of money thrown into the NHS. Fast forward a couple of years and they dipped down again. So that's why we say 3 years to get that trend. So look at the trends, look at the profit, how that has moved over those last 3 years. Look at the list size of the practice. Now, you won't necessarily see that in the accounts, so that potentially will be something to speak to the partners or the practice manager about. See how the list size is moving, because so much of the, your funding is driven by your patients. So if your list size is falling, the funding will be falling alongside it. But also, why is the list size falling? There might be, service issues. So, potentially second red flag there. So it shows the sustainability. You don't want to come into a practice and then 2 years later, they've got to hand their contract back because it's not sustainable. So look at the trends around the profits, the list size, the income and expense movements. Look at the drawings. So understand what the monthly drawings look like versus what the final profit allocation is. Drawings are on account of final profit. So if drawings are totaling, I don't know, £150,000 for the year, but your final profits are only 130, then perhaps the cash management isn't potentially working, or profits have dropped. So understand what your monthly drawings are versus your final profit allocation. So that, okay, well, this is what my drawings are, but there's usually a little bit of headroom there, and we usually get a little bit of an extra payout once the accounts are prepared. So it will avoid any surprises of actually the accountants coming at the end of the year and saying, oh, you've drawn too much money, you need to put some back in because you may well have spent it. So look at your drawings versus your final profit allocation. Look at the cash in the business. And what does the bank look like? So on the accounts, it should show you the bank balance at the end of every year. What does the total kind of capital invested look like for partners? Debtors and creditors. So debtors, people that owe you money, are they huge? Are they increasing? That potentially is a red flag, because maybe, again, the processes for getting the cash in aren't good. Maybe the claims process isn't working. How much money do you owe other people? Again, if that's increasing, perhaps it's because there's cash flow pressures. So it will show the resilience of if there are some cash pressures, how quick can the practice bounce back from these? What loans are there that you'd have to buy into? What potential tax liabilities might you have? Pension liabilities? Is there anything lingering on the bank, on the balance sheet of the practice that you could be liable for? So what is owed to people, and how much of that will you be liable? Just shows your exposure to any debt. Now, you are not expected to understand all of this. You may never have, seen what a set of accounts look like. So I think if you get a set of accounts, I would go and get an independent review. So we have people that come to us and say, I'm thinking of joining this practice. Could you have a look at the accounts and tell me your thoughts? So we can do that as a one-off piece of work, but we do also do it for our existing, partnerships who've got someone looking to join them. And we'll always give, an unbiased view, but as said, really understanding what the numbers show, the story behind the numbers, not just how much your profit is going to be.
Perfect, thank you. So in terms of partnership agreement, what factors need to be considered?
Red flag number 3, if there is no partnership agreement. This is like your Bible, effectively. This tells you how the practice operates. You need to see it even before you agree terms, because you will have to sign the partnership agreement. And so you are effectively binding yourself to those terms. And so if something happens down the line that you don't agree with, but you've signed the partnership agreement and it's quite clearly in there, it's going to be quite tricky to get yourself out of that. So make sure you have the partnership agreement, and that it's up to date. So it should be in the names of the partners who are there. If there's loads of old partners or some of the newer partners who may have joined are not on it, again, that's not an up-to-date partnership agreement. So, that would be my first kind of question is, why was there not an up-to-date partnership agreement when these people left or these people joined? They may go, oh, silly me, we've got a deed of adherence over here, and this is what you have to sign. So it could be, innocent. So yeah, first step, make sure you see it. Then it's to understand what it means for you. So there'll be various different clauses. And if it's a good partnership agreement, you're going to be looking at quite a lot of pages, maybe 30 pages, something like that. A lot of the terminology is a bit like gobbledygook because it's written by lawyers. So you have to read between the lines sometimes. But again, you can speak to an accountant or a lawyer, get an independent legal advice as well, and they will hopefully cut through the noise and tell you the main bits you need to think about, which are, so first off, how you enter the partnership. So is there a probation period? Can that be extended? What sort of things are considered during that probation period? Is there a mutual assessment? So they're assessing you, but you're assessing them. Is it a two-way street to see that the fit is there and that, you can back out if it's not a right fit for you? What capital do you have to put in? So a GP surgery is no different to any business. If you go and set up a bakery, you need an injection of capital to buy an oven, to buy your ingredients, etc. And to bridge the gap between spending the money and then getting the income from whatever it is you're doing. So joining a practice is no different. You need to have an injection of capital because they might have to pay out an outgoing partner. So there should be clauses in there about how much you need to pay and how you pay it. So is it a lump sum? Is it over a period of time? Whether it's a deduction from drawings, etc., etc. So understand how much capital and what is your route to parity. So do you go straight in at 100%, full profit share, full decision making, or do you have 6 months at 80%, 90%? What does that route look like? So we're in the practice. What about the work? So what sessions will you be working? What management duties will you have? Like I said, everyone might have a lane that they focus on. Maybe you don't have that to begin with. Maybe after 12 months, you found your feet, you then start to take on more and more management duties. Because also if you're like first time partner thrown in at the deep end, oh, by the way, you're now the finance lead, that's quite scary. So understanding what those management duties are there any out of hours requirements, enhanced access? We're not talking 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. So what does that working pattern look like? Leave, so maternity leave, paternity leave, annual holiday, sick leave, what are all of the policies around those? Big one, money. So what is your profit share? How much drawings will you get? What reserves? So what is the working capital that's left in? What's deemed to be a personal cost, a partnership cost? How is the tax handled? Does the practice pay your tax? Do you save for it and pay it yourself? So again, all of those kind of money subjects should be in there. Decision making. What are the voting? How does the voting work? What is the quorum for you need of number of partners? What is is it a 75% agreement? What is the voting process? What happens if you can't make a decision? How do disputes work? Yeah, what happens if you end up in this kind of deadlock of people can't decide, and that decision making is a really key one, I think, and tends to be where potentially disputes can happen. And then what happens when you want to come out? So how much notice do you have to give? Often it's 6 months notice. Often you can't have more than one GP hand their notice in every 6 months. So you don't suddenly get 4 out of 5 partners all leaving at once. So what is the notice period? Is there a compulsory retirement age? What are the grounds for expulsion, suspension? If you're leaving, you might have a premises. What's the valuation for the premises? And are there any restrictions for you going off and working somewhere else? So entry into the practice, the work that you're doing, the money that you'll be taking, how are the decisions made, and then how do you leave the practice. So they are kind of the 5 key areas that should all be covered in your partnership agreement, and make sure you get some independent advice before signing.
Perfect. You mentioned premises there. So what should someone consider in terms of premises?
Yeah, so this can be kind of the largest commitment that you might take, and often can put people off becoming partners. So you might be joining a partnership who is in a leased building. So the partners don't own. It could be owned by the council, a private landlord, ex-partners, NHS Property Services. So understand what you're coming into. Understand, is it a leased building? Is it an owned building? If it's a leased building, ask to see the lease, check the terms, who's responsible for repairing, insuring, are there any big service charge issues, which we often see with NHS Property Services. What are you coming in? What are you going to be liable for? What are the break clauses of any lease? So see the lease, and again, maybe take some advice on what that means for you. Will you be named on the lease? Because again, that will up the responsibility. And think about dilapidations. So dilapidations are kind of the wear and tear on the building. So when the lease renews, or if you move to a new premises, what state do you have to put the building back into? And is there provisions for that? Because if there's not, then, and suddenly, you join, and then that year you've got to spend £50,000 redecorating, recarpeting, you're going to pick up a full share of that. But all the partners that have been before you have either left and not picked up a share. So that's a big cost and will impact your profit share. So understand about dilapidations. And again, if there's historic liabilities, have they been ring fenced? If you own the premises, do you have to buy in? So we see varying options, and this has become more and more important because premises was putting some people off, because you might have to take a loan personally, you might have to buy into a partnership loan, and some people can be quite nervous about that, especially if you might not like it, you might not like the partnership, you might not like being a partner. So check whether you need to buy in, and if you do, when. Is it like day one, or is it on probation? Is it when you move to 100% parity, or maybe you've just completely got the option to never buy in? So who are you buying it from then, and the valuation that's used? Check about notional rent. So practices will receive notional rent. How does that fare against any loans that maybe you have to take out, or the practice has got, that you're buying into? Is it sufficient to cover the repayments of the loan? Now, where we talk about whether you have to buy in or not, if the partnership agreement says, no, you never have to buy in, you might choose to, but then everyone leaves and your new partners don't buy in. So you've got this last man standing situation. So that's a huge responsibility. So check around exposure to last man standing, which will come from, the buying options, really. So again, red flag if there's no lease, you've got large liabilities that haven't been ring fenced, you've got no dilapidations, partners nearing retirement, no succession plans. This is a lot that could kind of fall back on you, really.
You've mentioned a lot of financial aspects that people need to consider. Would you recommend maybe doing a personal cash flow as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning about not having a fixed salary, but also your life. How does this fit in with your lifestyle and how you like to live? So I think absolutely modeling what this looks like for you personally. So it comes back to some of the points we've said, understanding what your profit share will be, and then from that, what will your drawings be? Think about tax estimates. So a big shift here is not being taxed at source as you go throughout the year. You move into self-assessment. You're moving to have to do tax returns. And Jamie, as well as I do, we have some quite horrific conversations with, new partners and existing partners where they haven't planned for their taxes very well. So you could see some eye-watering tax bills in your first or second year, well, even actually as you move through, if profits are rising. But if you're prepared and you've planned for it, yeah, they'd be eye-watering, but actually generally you've got the money there saved for it. So understand from your drawings, is anything withheld for tax in the practice? It's your responsibility, but the practice sometimes saves for the tax. What's going to be deducted for pension if you're in the pension scheme, because the practice has to pay that over to PCSE? Is there any loans that you're buying into, so they'll deduct for the loan repayments? And are you going to have anything withheld for your capital build up? Because all of this is going to impact your take home drawings every month. So what is left after that, and how does that fit in with your lifestyle? And bearing in mind that if you've got to save for tax personally, you might think, oh, okay, well, that's all right, my drawings are, £10,000 a month, but actually you might need to be setting 40% of that aside, so you might only be left with 6,000. So really understanding where your starting point is, what are all the different things that need to come off, whether the practice pays it or you pay it, to be left with your disposable income. And that's then what you need to feed into your kind of day-to-day lifestyle. Now, it might be that you think, well, this is brilliant, I'm earning so much more than I was as salaried, which is often the case, although it doesn't often feel like that to begin with. Just, I think it's a timing difference, but quite often they're like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done it, but it usually comes good. But you might think, yes, gosh, drawings look really good, I might go and move house, get to a bigger house, might buy a car, might go on holiday, and then suddenly practice profits dip a little bit for whatever reason. There's a bit of uncertainty within GP contracts at the moment. So actually, is it then sustainable? Can you truly afford to move to that bigger house, or put the children in private schools, or, go on all of these lovely holidays? I hope so. But it's just, think about the longer term, not just this is what it looks like now. Is it going to be sustainable for you going forward? So we've said about, when you get the partnership agreement, get some independent advice. When you get the accounts, get some independent advice. The third point is to get some tax estimates, to think about, well, look, this is what they've said my drawings will be. What do I then need to put aside for taxes? Because if you start a practice on the 1st of April, let's say 26, your first tax bill is not going to be until January 2028. So you've got almost 2 years to save for that first tax bill. And I know I'm jumping ahead because I'm just going to cover it off now. That first tax bill will be large if you start at the beginning of a financial year, because you're going to have the tax that's due for the whole year profit. Plus, you have to pay on account for the next year, 50% on account. So that first January payment is almost kind of 1.5 times your tax bill. And then 6 months later, you have the second 50%. So that first 18 months, that's why I'm saying there's some quite large amounts. But if you start saving from April every month quite, religiously, then you should have it there, and you should have a buffer to then think, okay, well, what's left? I know I've paid that. I know what's coming up now for the next sort of 2 tranches, and I've got this little bit of a buffer. And then that's your kind of true sort of, disposable income. And I think that's the biggest area we see people getting caught out, don't we, of moving from salaried to partner, is those tax bills.
Yeah, it is. It catches a lot of people out. I know I've had a lot of conversations in those first few years about people not being able to afford their tax bills or how they afford it. I get a lot of questions about what people should ask for in terms of due diligence. What should they be requesting?
So I think we've covered a few bits of this as we've gone through, but it's useful to, I guess, to kind of pull it into a synopsis. And none of this is to catch out anyone. You're not trying to find problems in the practice. And likewise, they shouldn't be trying to catch you out and hide any problems. We want transparency here, because this isn't a decision that should be taken lightly. Because, I would hope that you join a practice and you stay there. I mean, we don't see the longevity of, staying at GP practices for your whole careers like we used to. But no one will go into a job or into a partnership thinking, oh, I'm going to do this for a couple of years and then I'm going to go somewhere else. You want to go in it and put your whole self in it and really make a difference. It's not about catching each other out, but if information isn't given or you're being kind of delayed or fobbed off and it's just they're not particularly willing, or you get a little bit of information, then you need to understand why that is. So from a financial aspect, the accounts, 3 years accounts, if they do management accounts, if they do budgets, you can ask to see those because that will give you in-year data. Understand the drawings and the bridge between profits and drawings, and understand what loans, what liabilities, what, you could speak to other partners about their tax bills. Usually they're quite open and honest and share their own horror stories and things. So coming back to kind of the legalities and thinking about the property. So you want the partnership agreement. You want to look at the contracts, if you've got GMS or a PMS contract, understand, you may already have an idea, but what enhanced services you're signed up to and what the obligations are to fulfill that, how they liaise with their PCN. Understand or have copies of the lease agreement, title deeds, again, occupation terms if you're in a leased building, what insurances, what indemnities you might need to take out or might be in the partnership name around, the property. And then from kind of the day-to-day operations, which we haven't talked massively about, CQC, understanding the rating, the process around CQC, the complaints procedure. Have there been many complaints that you might not, usually see because they're dealt with by the partners? Looking at the staffing, again, if you're there and have been for a while, you might see the staff coming and going. Are there any potential staff complaints, risks from an HR perspective that you could be liable for? What is the succession plan for the practice? Are you coming in and you sort of look around the table and there's 3 or 4 of the 6 partners potentially looking to retire in the next 5 years? What does that mean? Because it can be a long process to find new partners. So what is the succession plan and how you fit into that? What major projects are coming up for the practice? Maybe they're building an extension, or maybe they're moving to a new premises. Maybe they're looking to take on a neighbourhood contract. So future projects that, again, you are going to be part of. If you take that step into the practice, you've got to kind of believe and feel that those projects are.
You've covered a lot today. Is there any other questions that you would ask the existing partners at all?
Yeah, I think there are. And they may or may not give you a true answer, depending how much they want you to join the practice or how smoothly the practice runs, I guess. But I think it's good to try and arm yourself with the good, the bad, and the ugly, really. So I think one of the ones I would ask them is, what keeps them awake about the practice? What's coming up over the next 12 months, the short term, that they are worried about, because actually you might have a solution for that. And not to make you kind of run for the hills, but just to see, okay, well, let's coming into this with my eyes open, how do they make the decisions, and what happens when they disagree? Do they often disagree? Now again, they might go, oh, no, we never disagree about decision making. So you might just have to take some of this at face value. You could ask to sit in on some of their partners' meetings just to see how it works and how kind of useful and productive I'd say they are. What's expected from you beyond your day-to-day clinical work? What are they looking for from you as a partner? And we've spoken about sort of historic liabilities. So again, asking them if it's not readily available. And what would make them think, if they were joining the practice, what would kind of make them pause and take stock about, what's going on? Because I think when you're in it day to day, you don't sort of sit back sometimes and think about, well, actually, yeah, if I was coming into this with a fresh pair of eyes, where would my concerns be? What would make me think twice? Because that will actually potentially frame some decision making for everyone to go forward. And yeah, think about, listen for kind of specifics, not just fobbing you off or vague answers. I think, it's, you want to try and, where you can, get under the skin a little bit.
So once you've got all of this information, have you got any tips on how to then make a decision?
It's a tricky one because this is a very personal decision, and everyone will come at it and have a different, outlook on life, a different risk kind of profile, I suppose, and how, open to risk they are. But I think it's almost a bit like a traffic light system. If you've got clear accounts that look financially healthy, you've got a good partnership agreement, up to date, you've got all the information about the premises, there's nothing lurking, there's no skeletons in the closet, you fit culturally, you like the way the practice runs, you've got a good feeling about it, then in my view, green light, go for it. If there are some gaps in some of the information, there's been quite a few partners come and go, profit's been a little bit, up and down the last sort of 5 years or so, they're a bit unsure about how you're going to go through parity or the capital, there is, maybe a few disgruntled staff, then that's food for thought. That's pause, take some time, maybe dig a little bit deeper. Don't rush into the decision. That's kind of your amber sort of, hang on a minute, not fully sold. What are they going to do to get you over that line effectively? Then if we look at our reds, if there's no partnership agreement, the accounts are like one line that just says income, they don't meet with the accountant, there's no valid lease, they're not going to share documents with you, they're not answering your questions, you've got to pay huge amounts in for the building, for capital, not forthcoming about liabilities, then red flag, walk away. And if you're employed, you might think, well, I'll stay because I quite enjoy working here, I haven't got all of that responsibility. But then you've got to think, well, actually, how sustainable is the practice, and is my job actually at risk in the future? I think generally a good partnership will survive these questions, and they will understand why you're asking them. I think that's really key. But as I said, this is just kind of my perspective. It's not, I'm not the kind of font of all. I don't work in a GP practice. This is just what we see on the other side of it when we hear from our clients, and we see when it goes bad, but we also see when it's really good. And I think, actually just speaking to the partners about what they enjoy, like why did they become partners? I sit and listen to GPs talk about why they became partners, and I think that sometimes is key. Just they've got so much more power to shape what healthcare in their area might look like, rather than just have it imposed on you. If you think of yourself as a patient, what are the frustrations that you might have? And you have then potentially, within budgets and all of that jazz, but you potentially then have the power to make some changes.
Amazing. Thank you. One final question. If someone does decide to proceed with partnership, what should then the next steps be?
So I think there's obviously kind of administrative responsibilities, obviously, signing the partnership agreement, getting signed onto the lease. You'll need to speak with the practice manager because there will be considerations around updating the performers list, making sure your pension status is correct with PCSE. So there'll be kind of those day-to-day admin processes you need to go through. You need to get yourself an accountant, potentially, if you're not already doing tax returns. So you might choose the practice accountant, which often happens, or you may have someone else that you want to go to. We see a mixture. But I think one of the first things, well, actually, I'm hoping you've already spoken to an accountant to deal with all of the stuff we've just spoken about. But get them to do some tax estimates for you. Get them to look at your drawings and do maybe some kind of planning and working with you to map out what those big payments will look like, because that will really make a difference, I think, for that first kind of 2 years of your journey. And then just understand from a pension perspective what you need to do. So if you're a salaried GP, you should hopefully have been doing sort of pension certificates already. That continues, but it's a slightly different process that you have to go through, making sure the pension contributions that are paid to PCSE are correct. And I think when you get through that first year and you sit in on the accounts meeting, like ask the questions, make sure you understand what is being spoken about, because I know as accountants we can talk quite techie sometimes, and we forget that not everyone is an accountant. So for me, it's really important that my clients actually speak up and go, I have no idea what that means. Can you go through it a different way? Because I want you to come out of those meetings understanding what it means for you and your practice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's all right. Hopefully it was useful for everyone, but we're always happy to take questions like these if people are thinking of, joining partnerships. So by all means, reach out to us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise. If anyone does have any questions, our information is in the show notes.
Thank you for joining us for Larking Gowen Insights, Accountancy and Business Advice for All. Don't forget, you can find more information about today's topic and more about how our team of experts can help you in your business by visiting our website, larking-gowen.co.uk. Join us again next time for another fascinating insight into the world of accounting and finance.